Welcome. In this clip, we discuss the neoclassical theory of inflation. Inflation, denoted by the Greek letter pi in macroeconomics, is the increase of the prices in an economy. When the prices are decreasing in the economy, then we speak of deflation, that is, negative inflation. If you want to calculate the rate of inflation, then you can simply take the relative change of one of the price indices in the economy. You can use the GDP deflator or the consumer price index, for instance. But because these are based on different weighting schemes, don't be surprised that the inflation rate calculated with the GDP deflator or with the CPI will be quite different. There are two main forms of inflation. The first one is the so-called push inflation. This is caused by an increase in the cost of production. This could be, for example, because there is an increase in the price of energy. It could also be caused by an increase in wages. Point is that if costs go up, then the firms will experience a reduction in their profit. And as you possibly remember from the theory of the firm in microeconomics, this will lead to a reduction of the output by the firms. So total output will reduce while the demand did not change. As a result, we are going to have a situation when there is a shortage in the economy. So in order that the equilibrium is restored, prices must go up. In other words, you can see this situation as a result of a negative supply shock in the economy, which reduces output and causes an increase in prices. One of these push inflations were the main cause of the so-called stagflation in the 1970s. OPEC countries increased the price of oil in the world market, which resulted in many years of economic recession in the world. Many countries in America and Europe experienced a reduction in output, an increase in unemployment, and a relatively high inflation. That's why we call this period stagflation, which is nothing else than simply adding up two words, stagnation and inflation. Still, even though push inflation may play an important role in triggering episodes of economic recession, it is not the main cause of long-term inflation. Long-term inflation is caused by the so-called pool inflation. Now, pool inflation is nothing else than an increase in prices as a result of the demand in the economy growing faster than the supply. Now, this is possible if the central bank allows the money supply to go faster than the real economic growth. So let us take an example, thought experiment, if you like. So imagine that there are 10 people in a room and there are 10 apples. Now, every single individual is given €1. So the total amount of money, or you can say the nominal income in the simple economy, is going to be €10. What will be then the average price of an apple if they cannot spend the money on anything else, just on apple? Well, logically, it should be then €1 per piece. What happens if we double the nominal income of these people and everyone is given another euro? So now altogether the money supply is €20 in this room and there are still only 10 apples. Now this is when the demand increased even though the supply, the real output, was not changing at all. So then the average price of an apple is going to be €2. Now you can see that by just simply adding money into the circulation, you can cause an inflation which is proportional to the increase in total money supply. This pool inflation is the long-term source of inflation. And this is the one which will play a prominent role in the neoclassical theory of inflation. Now we look at the neoclassical theory of inflation. As we saw in the previous slide, inflation in the long run is a result of a faster expansion of money supply than the production in the economy. Using the quantity equation, where P denotes the price level, Y denotes the real income or real production in the economy, M denotes the total money supply or the total available quantity of money in the economy, and V is the velocity of money. So this relationship can be transformed into an equivalent linear relationship using a simple mathematical trick. Now, using the fact that the logarithm of a product is nothing else than the sum of the logarithm of the components of the product, we can simply log linearize the quantity equation. And what will happen that the P times Y becomes logarithm of P plus logarithm of Y, and the right-hand side becomes the logarithm of M plus the logarithm of V. In order to find a formula for inflation, we have to go one step further and calculate the effect of a change in any of these variables on this equation. In order to understand how you can calculate the effect of an increase of one of these factors on this equation, first you should realize that a change in the value of a variable can be expressed as the first derivative of the function with respect to a variable x times the actual change in x. And dfx just simply means a change in one of the variables which depends on some variable x. If you use this simple idea, then you can transform this log linear expression here into an expression which involves relative changes. And I'm going to show you that in the next slide. Using the mathematical trick we discussed in the previous slide, you can see now how you can go from the logarithm of a variable into an expression of the relative change of that variable. So here the function, this fx from the previous slide, is the natural logarithm of p, and x, the variable, is nothing else than p itself. So the change in the logarithm of p equals the first derivative of logarithm of p with respect to p, which you know is 1 over p, times the change in p, which is dp. And so we get that the change in p is going to be, so the change in logarithm of p equals the relative change of p itself, that is change in p divided by the value of p, and this is nothing else than inflation, the rate of inflation. Now you can do this again in both sides of the equation, and then you will have that the relative change of prices plus the growth rate of the real income in the economy should be equal to the growth rate of the money supply plus the growth rate of the velocity of money. Now, if you are willing to make a simplifying assumption, namely that according to the quantity theory of money, you say that the velocity in the long run is not changing, then dv equals 0, so basically that part, that component, will disappear from the above equation. And because dp over p is inflation, so we can replace that by the notation pi, you basically get that the rate of inflation is nothing else than the difference between the growth rate of the money supply, or well, actually the amount of money in the economy, and real economic growth. This finding is summarized by the great economist Milton Friedman in the short statement, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Now, it is possible, of course, to say that this is far too generalizing, but we can still accept the truth, nevertheless, that in most cases, the source of inflation is a faster expansion of the money supply than the actual economic growth. Now, let us see how much the data can confirm the neoclassical theory of inflation. The data, what you can see here, is provided by the St. Louis Fed, but I found this graph on the longtermtrends.net. So the point is that the black line here represents the growth rate of the money supply M2, and the red line represents the rate of inflation. These are both annual changes expressed as percentages, so they are comparable. You can see that up to roughly 2010, the relationship between inflation rate and the total amount of money in the economy was according to the neoclassical theory. So even though there were episodes when they were not moving together, but altogether, if you just look at the main tendencies, you will observe that in periods when the total amount of money increased in the economy, inflation also increased. In the last few years of the previous decade, so roughly somewhere starting from 2018, you can see that this relationship seems to stop working. Now, this is possibly a temporary phenomenon. You can see that even though there was a large-scale increase of the money supply in the United States, inflation rate still continued to remain roughly the same, so around 1 or 2%. What is the explanation? One possible explanation is what we refer to as the liquidity trap. Now, it may be that the money market is in a situation when the interest rate is so close to zero that whenever you pump more and more money into the economy, it all will be just simply hoarded by agents. So they are not going to appear in the economy as an increased purchasing power, causing an increase in inflation. Another explanation could be that simply banks became more cautious, and even though the central bank of the US, so the Fed, increased the monetary base in the economy, most of this increase resulted only in an increase of the reserves of the banks, because banks wanted to keep higher and higher reserves in order to be prepared for possible recession or unexpected events. Nevertheless, we are living in that period when this old relationship does not seem to work, but there were already episodes like this, so we shouldn't really bury the theory. Possibly this is the result of that long-term recession which started somewhere around 2008, and actually we are still not out of it at the moment.